To this introduction to the idea of inheritance in Java. Now, inheritance by definition is a mechanism for deriving a new class from an existing one. This allows us to reuse existing classes, which is a lot faster and cheaper in memory than writing a brand new class from scratch. A good way to think about inheritance from a general perspective is the is-a relationship. Now, this is the is-a relationship. Over here, I have provided a few examples of what you can relate to this relationship. So to start, a square is a rectangle, which is true because a square is a special type of rectangle. And the similar idea, a spoon is a utensil and a car is a vehicle. Now, inheritance is useful is because there will be many things that, for example, in this first example, that since a square is a special type of rectangle, a square should have all the properties that a rectangle has, plus some extra properties that a rectangle may not have, which is why the rectangle would be the parent or superclass of the square. Now you can think of the same idea for the other two. So now if we bring this idea to coding, or in Java, like the actual coding aspect, what I have here is three files. We have one named main.java, rectangle.java, which would be the parent class, and square.java, which would be the child class. So what we can do is we can go into rectangle.java and we'll just write a little bit of code for a rectangle class. So what does a rectangle have? Well, a rectangle will have a length and a width. So we can make two private variables for length and width. So now we have two private variables for a rectangle. So now we can set a constructor to actually set values for these length and width. So if we do make a public method, so the length and width will be an integer value. So now we have a constructor for our rectangle, which takes in the parameters for length and width. So now we are just going to set these values equal to what is input in the constructor. So now we have created our constructor. Now what we can do is create a few methods that a rectangle would have. So for example, we can return this length, we can return this width, and we can also compute the area of a rectangle. So now we have a class called rectangle, which has two private variables. It has a constructor for the length and the width. It has two methods to get the length and the width, and a method to compute the area of the rectangle. So now this is what we call the parent class. And now we're going to go into square. And a square is a rectangle, as we mentioned earlier. A square should have or share all of the methods that a rectangle has. Now, in order to do this in Java, in order to inherit all of the methods from the rectangle class to the square class, we use something called extends. So what we can do here is that public class square extends rectangle. So now we may have a red line here, but that is fine. It's because we don't have a constructor defined yet. So what we're going to do is define that constructor. So we can do public square. And because all sides of a square are equal, we can just take in one variable. And for this, we can just do int side. Now we have the constructor for a square, which just takes in int side. Now, what we can do in inheritance is that we can actually call the constructor of the parent or the superclass, the rectangle class, and use that within the constructor for the square class. So we know that in this situation, a square is a rectangle with all the sides that are the same length. So what we can do is call the constructor for the rectangle class, which we can do using the super keyword. And through this, we can then put in the arguments, which we have here. If we remember, we have one for length and one for width. So because in a square, they're all the same, length and width would also be the same. So it would be side and side again. So now we have called the constructor for the rectangle class with both length and width being equal to side because it's a square, so they're all the same. So what we can do is we can use the methods that are within rectangle and we can utilize them in square. For example, if we want to get the number for side, we can use either getLength or getWidth from the rectangle class, and we can use that to return the length of the side. So what we can do is we can create a new method called getSide, and within that we can get the width or length, they're both the same, the side of the square. So within this method, we're going to return, and instead of returning side, we cannot really do that because we don't have the instance variable. We can literally just call the method straight from the rectangle class, either getLength or getWidth because they're the same, and just return that. So we can return getWidth. So this method is from the rectangle class, and we can use it in order to get one of the side lengths for a square. We can also do getLength, and it will be the same thing. Sorry, I missed my capital. We can also do getLength, and it will be the same thing because the length and width are the same. We're just going to change it to width for this scenario. So now what we can do is go to our main file and create a new square object. And we can give it side length of 5 per se. So now we can call the getSide method for square, and it'll use the getWidth method from the rectangle in order to get the side length for the square. So we can do system.out.println, and we can do sq.getSide. And what this will do is it'll call this function, which comes from this class because a square extends this class. So we were able to use the methods from rectangle class in our square class in order to create a method in our square class. So now if we were to run main.java, it prints 5 because the side length of our square, each of the side lengths, is equal to 5. So what inheritance also allows us to do is to call methods from our parent class, the rectangle class, onto an object of the square type. So what we can do is we have an object that is of type square, so we can do sq, and we can call any of the methods from rectangle onto the square object because a square is part of a rectangle. So for example, we're going to use the area calculation. So if we do another system.out.println, and over here we can just put in sq.area. Now here area is not a method from the square class, rather it's a method from the rectangle class. But because we inherited the methods from the rectangle class onto the square class, it allows us to use the methods from the rectangle class on an object that is of the square type. So we are allowed to use the area method on our object that is of square type, even though it's not directly in our square class due to its extending the rectangle class. Now, if I were to run main again, we have the getSide, which is 5, and we also have 25, which is the area of the square with side length 5, which we got straight from the rectangle class. So we didn't have to recode a new method to get the area of a square. We can just simply take it straight from the rectangle class and use it on an object of the square class. So that is a basic introduction to the idea of inheritance in Java. And to recap, inheritance is a mechanism for deriving a new class from an existing one. In this situation, we derived the square class from the rectangle class and added some methods to the square class using the methods from the rectangle class. What this allowed us to do within our square class is it allowed us to get access to all of these methods from the rectangle class without having to recode them within our square class. So it's just easier, it takes less memory, and it's just more efficient when coding. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.